You're listening to Tarazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature.
Hi, this is Father Mark Boulos, and you are listening to Tarazi Tuesdays with the Bible as Literature podcast. No statement more fully captures the anti-scriptural sadism of colonial solipsism than the American expression, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. Unless, of course, the M is a shepherd standing at the midbar reciting the written command of the scriptural, inexistent, invisible, unseen, indomitable God who has no egregious, obscene, man-made statue or temple. By all means, join him if you can. In 1932, according to the Yale Book of Quotations, yes, the same Yale that arrested Jewish kids this week for following the shepherd. The Atlantic, yes, the famous liberal magazine that once, long ago, fought to protect Jewish kids, cited that ungodly saying, which is a much older saying, as uttered by a U.S. senator. Once the Atlantic and then Yale published it, it became a colonial reference, just before many terrible things took place under its spell. That senator would have loved Philo, or Josephus Flavius. The latter lived in Palestine and fought against the Romans, but later decided, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. There was a tension, Father Paul thunders, between the originators of Scripture and some of their followers. There was an intellectual fight. Father Paul continues, this took place in Alexandria. Remember, Philo was in Alexandria. And that's the head of the asp, as we say in Arabic. It's Alexandria, which was the intellectual capital of the Roman Empire. Against Alexandria, the shepherd cries, if you can't beat 'em, submit to God. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest. Bring more evils upon them, O Lord. Bring more evils upon those who are glorious upon the earth. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for to thee belong all the nations. Blessed Pascha to all peoples. Peace in the Middle East. I am honored to introduce Father Paul on the Bible as Literature podcast, Tarazi Tuesdays.
Before the rise of kingship, and that was intentional, before even entertaining kingship in 1 Samuel, after Joshua you have judges that ruled over Israel and Judah. And the name judges make them the precursors of the prophets who judged the people in the name of God. And the link is made through Samuel, who starts as a judge and then becomes Samuel the prophet. Interestingly, his name is God is his name, or his name is God. Now, this temptation of going one way or the other philosophizing and historicizing took place during the time in the 1st century BC and 1st century AD, championed by Herod and the Sadducees. Remember the building of the temple. Sadducees, their name are the children of Zadok, and so on and so forth, which means that they are Aaronites. And they endorsed the temple, which is the golden calf. And they imposed, as I detailed in my latest book, the understanding of what Iudeos meant, in other words, to be Judahite, in other words, we decide who is Jew and not. The other one was philosophizing, which was there among the Jews, and the classic example is Philo. End of the 1st century BC into the 1st century AD. And the one who historicized both are Josephus Flavius, who was in Palestine, and he was a hypocrite. At the beginning he was a Pharisee that fought against the Romans, and at the end he endorsed Rome and lived there, and he wrote, and he is the one who introduced the historicizing by talking about the antiquities of the Jews. So that mood was there in pre-Christian times, which means there was a tension between the originators and of Scripture and some of their followers. Obviously, they had their followers who maintained the Hebrew canon, but the others were fighting. And the intellectual fight took place in Alexandria. Remember, Philo was in Alexandria. And that's the head of the asp, as we say in Arabic. It's Alexandria, which was the capital, the intellectual capital of the Roman Empire. I mean, this is reflected in the first ecumenical councils that took place in Turkey next to Constantinople, but they were run by the Alexandrians. I mean, the whole issue of the non-Chalcedonians, they were in Syria, in Antioch, basically. Now, obviously, you can talk about the Copts and so on, but the main power, the writers and the thinkers, were in the area of Antioch. So Alexandria tried to control everything. I mean, Arius was also Alexandrian. I mean, the whole battle was there in Alexandria. I'm stretching the issue of Alexandria to show the functionality of Philo being in Alexandria at the time of Plotinus, who transformed the philosophy of Plato into a religion, philo-religion, which means he is the creator of what we call theology. So Herod and the Sadducees they assigned themselves as the locum tenentes of gods, which is like the ecclesiastical hierarchy. And the other is the scholarly hierarchy, where ultimately it reflects the attitude of the Nahash who lured Eve, who came out of the rib of Adam. So, this tension materialized in these people. Remember how the Septuagint is linked even in the stories of Sirach and other books, the letter of Aristeas, where Ptolemaeus asked scholars to come and translate, and the whole issue of the Septuagint as being equal to original through the story of the 70 or 72 that came up with the same translations and so on. All this is important for me because it reflects the mindset. And these people not only fooled around with the canon, but added books to the canon. That's the tension between the Septuagint canon and the Hebrew canon. Remember, at that time, the Hebrew was consonantal still, so we have to make sure that we're not talking about that. That's why I get irritated when people speak about the Old Testament as the Tanakh, because this is taken from later Jews. Now, let me throw now what happened to explain my view of the wisdom of Sirach. Now, wisdom of Sirach is interesting because it is an expansion of a book which is in the original Hebrew canon, which is the Wisdom of Solomon. Most important in both books, which is silly. I mean, they deal with wisdom, and yet you have an extensive rendering of the story of Israel. And in Sirach, at the end, you have the people to be emulated are biblical heroes, not Greek heroes. And among them is Jeremiah, as I quoted in my forum 2 months ago. And its name, Ecclesiasticos, is the extension of the name of Ecclesiastes. I think it works on both levels. Whose teaching, as I said and I repeated, basically is the Torah, which is HaKohelet, and not human wisdom. Now, this book, in spite of all the other scholars, one cannot prove that there is a Hebrew text that was translated in Greek. My contention is that the Greek was original and then it was translated in Hebrew by whomever. And it reflects the mood of the intro, the so-called prologue, where you have a punch in the face of all the efforts of, let me call them the opponents. And this idea of opponents is all over the place. You have it between Jesus and his disciples, Paul and the others in Jerusalem. So I'm not going to accept the NATO scholarship. Well, as what happened? Nothing happened. Its stories, Galatians is extreme by showing that Paul brought with him Barnabas as a proof of his gospel. And then this Barnabas sides with Peter in Antioch. It's an extreme story. It doesn't happen even in Hollywood.
Bible as Literature is a production of the Ephesus School Network.